Hello everyone, Literal Fair. Welcome to the Week 3 episode of the Chaos Report for the Blight Challenge League. In this video, I'll be taking another short look at our unique item watchlist. We'll also be taking a quick look at the current meta, as well as taking an in-depth look at the blighted maps, both from a commodity perspective in our currency section, as well as taking a deeper look at red tier blighted maps in our strategy section. As always, do keep in mind that these are educated guesses or predictions, and as such they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that seem obvious to many, and for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything after all. If I do miss something you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. If that means, of course, is invest at your own risk. And with that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right in. As per usual, for our first segment, we'll be taking a look at the currencies that are currently important to keep an eye on. As always, Exalted Orbs are up first. Exalted Orbs have, since last week, risen by another 5C to a completely unprecedented price of 190 chaos each. The only other league to ever see prices as high as these for Exalted Orbs was Betrayal. The reason for that should be pretty apparent. However, the prices in Betrayal never eclipsed the 195 chaos per Exalt price point, and only reached it in the first place for 2 days total. The price stayed above 190 chaos for 8 days total, but that was about 7 weeks into the league. We're currently entering week 4 of this league, and as a result, the prices shouldn't have reached this high of a peak yet, if previous leagues are anything to go by. A lot of the reasoning from last week still holds true, as the summoner craze continues throughout week 3, and tons of multi-modding happens on a daily basis. Furthermore, many people are reporting lower drop rates for Exalted Orbs in general. Whether or not this part is true is of course conjecture, and only supported by anecdotal evidence at best, so don't take anybody's word for it, to be honest. Similarly to last week, I will not be able to make any predictions for Exalted prices, as they simply do not seem to adhere to the previous league's trends, react to market changes, such as the 3.8.1 patch, or get influenced by any other currency changing its price. This behavior for a currency is extremely uncommon, and as a result, I have no real predictions to make for this one. I sincerely apologize for this. Hopefully the Exalted Orbs will start to resume their normal operations shortly, at which point they are projected to fall, if we can take any amount of precedent from all the previous leagues at least. We do not know where the zenith will be for the Exalted Orbs in this league, but so far it does not seem like they have reached it. Similar advice to last week as well. Farming Exalted Orb divination cards is extremely valuable right now, due to the unprecedented rise in price for Exalted Orbs this early in the league. In addition to last week's recommendation, which I'd highly advise you to check out in the Week 2 episode, I'll also recommend an Elder or Shaped Alleyway strat, which I'll be talking a bit more about in our Atlas analysis section. I'll be ending this part of the Exalted Orb price analysis by imploring you to check Exalt prices regularly yourself during the next week, as the prices are impossible to properly predict and they might rise or drop at a moment's notice. As predicted last week, the Alteration Orbs have indeed continued their slow but steady climb, reaching their peak at a 6-to-1 ratio. They've since then dipped a tiny little bit again, down to 6.2-to-1 ratio. However, they will likely stay strong around the 6-to-1 or 7-to-1 mark for quite some time. These orbs have seen their highest price ever in the Legion League. However, it is unlikely that they'll reach a similarly high level in this league again, due to the reduced amount of Alt plus Regal crafting, comparatively to last league's meta. This is due to the difference in usage cases from last league to this league, as melee characters often require 2 or more Alt plus Regal crafted items, whereby summoners are usually good with 1 or 2 at most. Additionally, the meta is a lot more diverse this league as it was last league, since most players preferred a melee approach, all requiring more than 2 multi-modded, and thus Alt plus Regal crafted items per character. With the buffed blighted maps being run by more and more people, we have also seen an increase in the overall supply of Alteration Orbs, as they represent an easily accessible currency source for players, similarly to the Legion's monoliths and timeless domain encounters. This might be the case for the Alteration Orbs' lowered prices compared to last week, together with the previously mentioned differences in their usage amount compared to the Legion League. We could potentially see a further rise in the future, depending on whether or not players will continue to use the Alt Regal crafting method in increasing amounts. However, I don't think that Alteration Orbs will reach the same godly heights as they did last league, and as such will limit their prices to about 6-to-1 ratio. Ancient Orbs have, since last week, seen a large increase in their prices, peaking at 51 chaos a pop. However, dipping down to about 45 chaos in the last few days again. As I stated last week, this was a definite possibility due to the volatility of this particular currency. If the headhunter prices increase, or this currency's prices decrease, they will likely rebound fairly heavily as a result, as more players will start to pick them up due to the low prices. I've explained the interaction between the Nemesis Zana mod as well as the headhunter prices and the Harbinger Zana mode over the past few weeks, and this week has been a prime example of this. We've seen a rapid increase in prices for Ancient Orbs, then seen the headhunter dip a tiny bit for a day or two, and then rapidly rise at the end of the week, while Ancient Orbs prices fell again. The interaction between Ancient Orbs and Headhunters will always be a few days delayed, as the market takes a bit of time to react to any given change in mass. With the Headhunter rising in price and the Ancient Orbs falling, we'll likely see an increase of their prices again in the following days. If that is not the case, the Headhunter will very likely not continue its price rise either. I have, so far, severely underestimated the amount of people that are willing to chance the Headhunter belt with Ancient Orbs, and as such have understated the likely fluctuation range. I'll be correcting this now by predicting that the fluctuation prices will be around 35 to 60 cows, instead of the previous predictions which laid around 40 cows max for normal fluctuations, extremes not included of course. As this interplay between the Ancient Orb, the Zana mods and the Headhunter belt are quite intriguing to follow, I'll keep the Ancient Orbs in this section of the Chaos Report for now. They have been far more interesting to follow than I first anticipated. I'm excited to see where they end up next week. As for my prediction, they'll likely continue their rise and fall game, corresponding to the Headhunter prices. The price adjustments will likely take 2 to 3 days to affect each other, however, so keep that in mind in case you want to buy or sell any of them. Having already reached the Blighted Maps area of the Chaos Report, let's take a look at how the Blighted Maps have changed their prices since last week. Of course, as last promised in the Chaos Report last week, we'll be going over more Blighted Map related discussion later in the video, after the Atlas analysis, where we usually have our overall discussion and strategy part. We'll be taking an in-depth look at the worth of red tier Blighted Maps, specifically T13s, in the current meta of the game at that point. However, until then, let's take a look at the Blighted Map prices overall. Since last week, the overall prices for pretty much all the Blighted Maps have increased as predicted. However, we do see that the majority of white maps have actually fallen to the around 20 chaos price point from their last week 22 chaos majority. As a result, your baseline Blight encounter maps has lost a tiny bit of minimum value. That said, keep in mind that the yellows and red Blighted maps have increased in prices, which will result in a net gain for the currency that each Blight encounter is potentially worth, assuming you're running at least yellow to red tier maps at the moment. Currently, I would recommend skipping encounters below 5 lane minimum if you're running on a fast build. If you're in need of currency, however, I would recommend running all of them, as they do drop quite a decent amount of extra currency per map, and thus make it more efficient per map ratio rather than per hour, regardless of lane count. The more expensive yellow maps have placed themselves at around 30 to 45 cows, depending on the map tier. Higher tiers in general fetch a higher price than the Blighted maps. This is due to their scaling, which does indeed indicate a more favorable table towards the higher tier maps. As a result, tier 10 maps are better to run than tier 6 for making money, which will explain their respective prices. The most expensive Blighted maps are of course the tier 15 red maps, just like last week, which have all found themselves at about 125 cows each. Another update from last week, Blighted maps do indeed inherit the base position and type of the map, which means that maps such as Dark Forest are more favored because they can drop the respective Dark Forest only divination cards during the loot explosion of the Blighted map encounter. They will not, however, drop map specific items in the chests as far as I can tell, so keep that in mind. The other red tier Blighted maps of interest are all that are above or at T13. We'll go more into detail during our strategy section as to why that is the case, but for now, just be aware that each of those maps, meaning T13 and above, excluding T15s, go for about 88 to 90 chaos each at the current moment. For farming Blighted maps, the same rules as last week still apply. The highest possible map you can run is the best map to farm in. T16s and 15s have a vastly increased chance to receive more lanes per encounter, which in return will give you more chances to receive Blighted chests, and thus Blighted maps and oils. We'll be going more in depth on T13 Blighted maps in the later section of this video during the strategy discussion, as promised last week. With those currencies and blighted maps covered, let's move on to our unique item watchlist. It currently consists of only 5 unique items, however we'll be keeping this number of items for now, to make some room for more discussions around blighted maps later in the video, just like we did last week. Also similar to last week, let me know in the comments down below if you'd like me to keep the unique item watchlist this short, or if you prefer a longer watchlist instead, similar to how we used to have them in the Legion Chaos reports. The Tempered and Transcendent Flesh are the first ones on our list, as per usual. Last week, we've talked about potentially removing these 2 jewels from our list. It seems that the jewels might have watched the episode and realized their imminent demise, as they have shot up in terms of prices, for no discernible reason starting Friday. The rise has not yet concluded, and as I'm not aware of the reason for this rise, it's very hard to determine where they'll end up. The jewels have so far stuck around the 80 chaos area, ever since their initial rise, which ended around September 16th. Since then, they've solidly stuck around the 80 chaos area, with minimal changes. As we keep mentioning, they still represent a very solid choice for everyone that paths around the Duelist and Marauder area, and is absolutely recommended if you can fit it into your crit-based build in any possible way. It grants a total of 56% crit multiplier, if socketed in the Marauder Jewel socket. As many of you will realize, this is higher than even a 4 crit multiplier rare jewel, which will easily explain my repeated recommendations for this jewel. Their price hike could be explained by a streamer build or a rise of sudden popularity for specific builds that path around that area. If you happen to know of a streamer build that has recently started using this jewel, which might explain its rapid descent into the high-priced jewel slots, feel free to leave in the comments down below. I always enjoy reading everybody's speculations about the causes for price rises. As always with these 2 jewels, keep in mind that you can create your own Transcendent Flesh with a Vial of Transcendence, a Tempered Flesh, as well as a Tier 3 Sacrifice Room in Alva's Temple. At the moment of writing this part, it will run you about 22 chaos total, netting you a profit of around 120 chaos, if you intend on selling the resulting Transcendent Flesh. As a result of their sudden change in demeanor, we'll keep them in the watchlist for now, as their entire story does not seem to have been written yet for this league. We'll return to them next week and see how they develop. It is likely that the price increase will continue on for another day or two, depending on the underlying reasons for it, which I am unaware of. In Legion League, these jewels were able to fetch a maximum price of about 655 chaos. We're very likely not going to return to this price point, but we might get up to its first week price of about 185 chaos. Keep an eye on them on the following week and consider running a few extra Alva missions to potentially cash in on the Transcendent Flesh or 2 while their prices are still high. Overall, I wouldn't imagine them to stick around this price point for too long, but this is simply a blind prediction with no basis outside of the league's previous data, so take it with a spoonful of doubt. Moving on to my favorite flask in the entire game, as well as by far the most expensive flask, the Bottled Faith. This flask has barely seen any changes since last week. It is still sitting squarely at the around 20x or about 3,800 chaos area. The reason for its enormous prices were explained in the last 2 episodes. The rarity of this flask, however, I have heavily underestimated, which led to my previous prediction of them being likely to drop a bit farther before stabilizing. I have ran over 100 Red Tier Zana missions in the last week and have not received a single Cortex encounter, which leads me to believe that the drop rate for this flask, and thus the supply, is way more limited than I originally anticipated. Of course, this is anecdotal evidence at best, as it's a small sample size combined with it being my own personal experience. As a result, these statistics are not something to go off of when you try to report on economics or statistical changes in anything. However, I felt it was fitting to add this part, as it can highlight the personal change in my viewpoint, which has occurred since the release of the league. I'm now changing my predictions to place this flask at a roughly twice higher price point than the last few weeks. I'll be surprised to see them fall below 15x anytime soon, as they seem incredibly steady at the current 20x price point, as well as coupling this with the insane rarity of them. One further update, which again is very low sample size and could be conjecture, I have had 2 reports of viewers getting the Cortex encounter from Zana in a sub-level 80 zone, indicating that the Tier 13 minimum requirement might not be a thing for the Cortex, which is something I had originally warned about being potentially the case. I would still recommend trying to run your Zana missions on T13s at least, as again, this is a very small sample size of people reporting this, and I have not seen it happening myself yet. As a result, take this information as what it is. Very unreliable, but interesting nonetheless. If you have received the Cortex encounter in Blight League before, and you distinctly remember, best would be with a screenshot of course, what tier you got the encounter in, feel free to provide this information directly to me on my Discord or Twitter. I'll include it in future episodes, so we can clear up whether the Cortex has the level 80 requirement that the Einhar Portal Beasts have, or not. To wrap this one up, all I have to add is that the Flask will likely continue to be a staple of high currency characters due to its incredible power budget, coupled with the rarity of it. Pretty much all builds in the game, especially crit ones, consider this one to be one of their best in-slot damage flasks. As a result, if you receive one, it might be worth using over selling, if you're otherwise fine on currency. That said, 20x is a lot of currency to start new characters with. Just saying. Following that, let's take a quick look at how the Primordial Jewels are doing. As predicted, they all continued on with their rapid price drops after the short resurgence due to the streamer build mentioned last week. They have all reached price points that make them absolutely unsustainable for farming purposes, and as such I would recommend switching your farming setup, if you haven't already, to a different one. I can highly recommend Exalted Orb divination card maps such as Alleyways or Precinct, due to the incredibly high, stable, and increasing prices of Exalted Orbs this league. There is likely not going to be another price increase for the Primordial Jewels unless another streamer makes a build for them, and as a result, we'll be removing the Primordial Jewels from the watchlist. Next week, we'll be adding a different unique to the watchlist in their spot. Next up, the Devouring Diadem. Similar to the Primordial Jewels, the Devouring Diadem has seen another drastic price decrease. It has slowly bottomed out at around 20 chaos right now, which is substantially lower than in any previous league, which is likely caused by the increased amount of people that are willing to run the Mastermind due to its reworked reward structure. As a result, the Diadem has a lot more supply and not really a big difference in demand, as most players have clearly realized that the mana nerfs done by GGG in 3.8 weren't that drastic after all. Without any outside interference, such as a streamer making the item incredibly popular, I don't see this supply and demand game changing throughout the rest of the league. In conclusion of that, we'll also be removing the Devouring Diadem from the watchlist. There will, of course, be another unique added in next week's episode in its place. Now, moving on to our third segment for this video, the good old meta analysis. Comparatively to last week, there have been very little meta changes overall. We're able to observe a 1% drop in Saboteur players, which has slightly redistributed itself among the Juggernaut and Guardian ascendancies towards the lower percentages. Outside of that, no real changes have occurred regarding the meta. Players are still playing the same characters as last week, which means that Necromancers, and thus mainly Summoners, still hold the majority of the player base enthralled. One thing that did indeed change over the past few weeks, however, is the distribution of player skills used on the Assassin Ascendancy. Where we've seen mostly poison builds at the start of the league, we now see that a ton of them have moved over to a cast while channeling Cyclone plus Ice Nova setup, whereby Cobra Lash, the most used poison skill, has dipped from its number 1 spot down to number 3. This is a result of the poison rework not being well received by a lot of players, which since then have decided to take advantage of the amazing rework for the Assassin to build a tried and tested cast while channeling build instead. For crafting, however, continue to focus on the Summoners, as they are clearly representing the majority of the player base at the moment. But don't throw out those high elemental or spell damage rings, as they are very much loved by the new Cyclone Assassins, so keep that in mind. As for the Atlas analysis, most of what I have recommended the last 3 weeks is still holding true. However, there will be an additional recommendation here. Outside of the maps and strategies mentioned in the last 3 weeks, I would also recommend Alleyways and either a Shaped or Elder Strat, as mentioned earlier during the Exalted Orb currency section as well. Alleyways offers a great variety of benefits that the other maps here do not quite offer in the same way. Firstly, it is another one of the Exalted Orb divination card maps. It drops the Saint's Treasure, similar to Precinct. However, unlike Precinct, this map is very linear, which means there is less downtime between packs and thus less downtime between being able to get a drop. Secondly, the position on the Atlas is very favorable due to cheaper Sextons, as it's surrounded by exclusively white maps, and as such your Sexton setup will be a lot cheaper to handle than something like Precinct. Lastly, for players that are just getting into the mapping process, Alleyways is also a natural tier 2, which will allow you to start farming it very early on. With minimal investment required, it will also allow newly mapping players to try and catch up with the overall economy. Even just one or two of these div cards will kickstart any build or atlas progression you might be looking for. As a reminder from last week, of course, there are an absolute ton of worthwhile maps to run, both on a shaped as well as an elder strat, as the league mechanic is not map restrictive and supports every kind of map pretty much equally. Following that, feel free to do your own research and decide on what map you like best. The maps presented here are only recommendations, and possibly easy to set up maps. They are not necessarily the absolute best, nor the absolute only choice for you in this league. With the Atlas analysis finished, let's dive right into the Blighted Map discussion just like we did last week. Similarly to last week, I'll be referencing a lot of my own personal testing, as well as Grimro's newly released video, which covers his testing of the red T13 Plus Blighted Maps. I'll be posting a link to the video in question in the description as well, so make sure to head on over and hear it from Grimro himself as well. His data is extremely worthwhile as it represents a larger sample size to work with and is very well represented. Additionally, I have received some data from a few viewers as well, so thank you for that. It is very useful and very much appreciated. As for the testing methodology and dataset used for the following segment, I'll only be referencing triple teal oiled T13 maps. The reason for this is manifold. Firstly, T13 Blighted maps, and normal blight encounters in T13 maps as well for that matter, are the first ones that can drop golden oil, from our current knowledge standpoint at least. The area level has to be at or above 80 in order to drop golden oil, which correlates with the often mentioned restrictions on the portal beast for Farol with the Bestiary League mechanic. As a result, if you're running red maps in any way, either blighted maps or not, make sure to run them at least at tier 13, as they seem to be the only ones that can drop the highly sought after golden oil, thus increasing your potential profit margin substantially. Secondly, as for the reasons stated in Grimro's video, which you should absolutely check out for exactly that information, teal oils seem to be the most cost-efficient oils that have been tested publicly. Furthermore, teal oils are also sustainable by simply running the T13 Blighted maps themselves, through the 3-to-1 trade-up of oils dropped in them, resulting in not having to worry about buying oils once you've reached a critical mass of run maps and oil. Similarly, leading to an increased efficiency as you will not be required to spend time on trading in between each set of maps you intend to run. As for the overall profit margin, we'll be covering Grimro's dataset first. As always, he has presented a very useful spreadsheet detailing his 15 runs of Blighted T13 maps. One last reminder that if you are interested in his findings specifically regarding the Blighted maps, and more specifically, oils, as he also tests 15 similarly run maps with Crimson oil, I absolutely recommend checking out his video, as it is very informative, and the video, as well as the previous one for yellow Blighted maps, are very well produced. You can find the link to the video about red tier Blighted maps in the description, so make sure to check it out. The overall profit margins that Grimro recorded show a roughly 116 profit per map over 15 teal oiled maps. These prices assume that the 15 maps he bought were all bought for about 65 chaos each, which is about 25 chaos cheaper than the current prices, and that the 45 teal oils were bought for a total of 90 chaos, which is a bit more expensive than the 67.5 chaos it would cost at current prices. Each of the Blighted maps takes about 6 to 7 minutes to run, and as a result, you'll be running about 10 of them per hour at best, if you're being efficient. This means that the overall profit margin for tier 13 teal oil Blighted maps that Grimro reported, adjusted to the current prices, is somewhere around 15.5 chaos a minute, or about 930 an hour. This data, similarly to last week, is very similar to my own limited testing, as well as the data I've received from viewers, as I've identified a similar amount of profit in my 10 red maps, as well as the viewers' combined 25 maps, only counting maps that have had their investment level be similar to Grimro's, in order to properly combine the datasets and get a bigger sample size to draw conclusions from and limit the influence of RNG. That means each recorded map that has been used for this combined dataset was 20% quality, as well as arced and rerolled to about 80% quantity. I am unfortunately not 100% aware of Grimro's exact setup for each map, but I figured that 20% quality and 80% quantity was a decent enough baseline to assume. In my own and my viewers' combined dataset, we've recorded roughly 14.7 chaos profit a minute, or about 882 chaos an hour total profit at current prices. As a result, If we combine the datasets presented by Grimro with these datasets, we'll arrive at a roughly 15.1 chaos per minute profit, with a total profit of 906 chaos an hour, tested over about 50 similarly invested maps. This represents a substantially larger sample size than last week's yellow map Blighted report, and hopefully makes up for the 1 week wait on this data. Following that, of course, there has been zero data to suggest that mass running these maps at a price point of about 90 chaos will lose you money, neither in Grimro's data, nor in my own, nor in my viewers. The general base loot level seems to support a substantially higher price point for the tier 13 red blighted maps themselves, as they are bound to pay out magnitudes more chaos than those 90 to 95 you're going to invest per map. Running these maps, however, is only recommended for players that have capital to invest in at least 10 to 15 maps, as RNG can swing heavily in these types of chest-based reward systems. While a singular golden oil would swing you heavily towards being profitable in one map, not getting a single opalescent oil in 5 will significantly lower yours as well. As a result, please keep that in mind before you attempt to run these blighted maps for a profit. Additionally, keep in mind that T13 Blighted maps aren't as easy as the yellow maps presented last week, and as a result, you have to make sure that you're powerful enough to handle these properly. Failure is not an option if you're investing upwards of 100 chaos into these maps if you're looking to turn a sustainable and constant profit. Closing out this discussion on blighted maps, which we might continue in future episodes if there's more information that needs to be conveyed, I'll recommend the same thing I recommended last week. If you're not likely to be able to get at least 10 red tier blighted maps before you attempt to run them, I would probably recommend selling them, as you will not be able to sustain a bad RNG streak with only 3 or 4 sample size of maps. However, it might be worthwhile to wait a day or two after the release of the video to start selling them, as the prices might substantially increase in the next week, as more and more people become aware of their ridiculous profitability. I hope these 2 last episodes have given you more in-depth insight into the workings and statistics behind blighted maps. If there is anything you want me to test or cover in future episodes, in a similar depth to the blighted map coverage, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. Now for the last little segment, some rapid fire farming and or crafting tips for some lower econ players. First up, the weekly delve update. This is honestly what I'm calling it now, since let's be real, let's be entirely real here. We have and will be doing this every week, alright? This is just the delve update now. Since last week, corroded fossils have further dropped in price, and have now arrived at a 3 chaos price point. Similarly, the bound fossils has also seen a slight price drop from 11 chaos to 10 chaos since last week. As a result, the petrified forest area has lost its recommended spot on this list. Instead, I'll be recommending to continue farming the frozen hollow primarily, but secondarily focus on the magma fissure area instead of the petrified forest like last week. The magma fissure offers a great assortment of fossils, namely the pristine, prismatic, and enchanted fossils en masse, which are all either stable or rising in prices. Serrated fossils currently sell at 15 chaos, enchanted fossils are going for about 8 chaos each, pristines have dipped slightly to about 8 chaos, and prismatic fossils are steady at about 5 chaos each. As always, remember to save up a few and sell in bulk, as you can easily ask for 50 plus chaos up price for a well-sized stack. If your build can handle dealing with the syndicate during a crash, you might be able to take advantage of the game's frequent crashes to make yourself a quick buck. Many players are unable to complete their research encounters in the Immortal Syndicate due to these crashes, which has increased the prices for all kinds of pure breachstones tremendously since last week. A singular T3 It That Fled encounter in the research safe house, if she's placed as a leader, will be able to net you anywhere from 280 to 400 plus chaos profit, depending on your initial investment level. I would recommend all Nithal breachstones for the lower econ players that can't invest more than 80 to 90 chaos per safe house, and the Chayla breachstones for the players with a bit more liquid currency. Continuously crafting eye-level 83 plus Abyss Jewels is as profitable as ever. Aim for T2 plus life, or ES together with T2 plus flat damage rolls to grant yourself some easy influx of currency. I'm personally using this as the main source of constant income, as they're very easy and fast to roll. They might take a while to sell, but if you diligently roll and list them, you'll end up with a decent amount of them at once, which will grant you a very steady income. This is nothing new, of course, as I've always mentioned this in the first week episode. That said, I just wanted to remind everyone of this currency making method, as I've seen a lot of people question how to make easy currency if they themselves don't have that much. This is probably one of the easiest ways, and is highly recommended as a result. Ghastly Eye Jewels are still the best selling Abyss Jewels on the market, and are thus the preferred choice for crafting. And with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this week's Chaos Report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you would have wanted me to talk about anything in specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon and maybe consider signing up for it. You can find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is highly appreciated. If you have any suggestions for Patreon rewards that you guys would like to see, please let me know in the Discord's feedback channel, down below this video in the comments, or on my Twitter. I read all of your comments everywhere. You can find a link to my Twitter and Discord down below in the description as well. Furthermore, let me know if you'd like to see me cover a particular topic regarding Path of Exile. I'm always willing to explore new video types. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingamajig, like or dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/LonerWolf. You can find a link to my stream down below in the description as well. And with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those Exalts.